The technical drawings said this building had been cut off from electricity since 2013, yet the light bulb in the guardroom was still radiating warmth. I hate Detroit in November. The sky looks like a soggy, filthy wool blanket draped across the dead skyscrapers of a glorious industrial age. And the rain. A cold, persistent drizzle. Not enough to wash away the gray aim, just enough to make everything tacky. My Ford F-150 turned onto the access road leading to St. Jude Memorial. The wipers squeaked, a monotonous sound that pulled me out of my brooding thoughts about the divorce papers still on the kitchen counter this morning. St. Jude materialized before me like a colossal corpse of concrete and broken glass. 12 stories high, built in the 60s in the crude brutalist style, it now stood gray-amly amidst a wasteland overgrown with waist-high weeds. The blackened windows were like hundreds of empty eyes staring at me, waiting. I am Elias Thorne, a structural engineer. My job is not to save these buildings, but to sign their death warrants. The real estate corporation wants to knock this place down to build luxury condos, but they need to ensure that this rotting skeleton won't collapse on the demolition crew at the first blow. An easy job, 3 days of surveying, marking weak load-bearing points, taking photos, and collecting the pay. I like these jobs. Concrete doesn't lie, steel doesn't betray, and most importantly, no one here asks me, "Are you okay?" I parked right in front of the main lobby, turned off the engine. The silence was immediate, so heavy I could hear the pulsing of blood in my ears. I put on my raincoat, slinging the heavy backpack containing my laser measure, high-powered flashlight, and camera onto my shoulder. My breath plumed out in a white cloud. The revolving glass door in the main lobby was jammed shut, plastered with faded yellow caution tape. Next to it was an auxiliary door for staff, locked with a massive rusted iron chain. "All right, you old girl," I muttered, pulling the bolt cutters from the truck bed. "Let's see how stubborn you are." The dry, sharp sound of metal being sheared, C-R-A-C-K, echoed off the wet brick wall. The chain fell to the ground with a heavy thud. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell, that was the first thing that hit me. Not the usual musty smell of abandoned houses. It was stronger, harsher. The scent of stale standing water mixed with industrial cleaning chemicals. The chlorine concentration so high it stung my nose. Strange, this hospital closed nearly a decade ago. The antiseptic smell should have evaporated long ago. I turned on my flashlight. The 2,000 lumen beam tore through the thick darkness of the grand hall. The cracked marble floor was covered in dust, debris, and old promotional flyers. The curved reception desk sat forlornly in the center of the hall, like a shipwrecked island. On the walls, oil paintings of martyred saints had been slashed, the canvas drooping like flayed skin. I began my work procedure. Photograph the lobby's condition. Check the main columns. The concrete here showed signs of carbonation. The rebar inside was starting to rust, but the overall structure was still sound. I made notes on my tablet, the clicking of the stylus echoing in the vast space. That's when I saw them. On the dust-covered gray-tiled floor, there were streaks of bright red. At first, I thought they were marking lines from a previous survey team, maybe the geodetic crew last year. I walked closer, shining the light down for a better look. Not plastic string, thread, sutures. Hundreds of red threads, each about 3 to 5 inches long, scattered across the floor. They weren't in spools, but cut into tiny pieces, strewn everywhere as if someone had just given a giant red demon a haircut right here. Their red color was too bright, too fresh compared to the surrounding gray dust. I picked one up. It was tough, slightly sticky, and smelled metallic. I brought it to my nose. The smell of rust. Or dried blood. I frowned, flicked the thread away. Maybe local kids playing pranks. They often break in here to paint graffiti or do some stupid devil-summoning rituals they learned on TikTok. I continued deeper inside, heading towards the elevator area. The elevators were dead, of course. I had to use the stairs to get to the upper floors. Next to the elevator entrance was a small, glass-enclosed guard booth, where security personnel used to control access. I shone my light into the guard booth. A dilapidated swivel chair, a coffee-stained desk, and a Tie AIM magazine from 2012. I was about to leave when my eyes stopped at the old desk lamp, the black architect-style clamp lamp. It was off. Of course, it was off. The whole building had been cut off from the main grid since it closed. But something urged me on, a sense of wrongness that was hard to describe. Maybe it was because the air inside the guard booth seemed thinner than outside. I opened the glass door of the guard booth and stepped inside. The cramped space was heavy with the smell of old paper. I reached for the incandescent bulb inside the lampshade. I froze. My finger hadn't touched the glass surface, but I felt it. Warmth. I held my breath, placing my entire palm on the bulb. It was warm, not scalding, but a gentle warmth, as if it had only been turned off a few seconds before I entered the hall. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately spun around, sweeping the large hall with my flashlight. "Is anyone here?" I shouted. "Is anyone here? Here? Here?" The echo bounced off the walls, distorted and fading until it was gone. Only the sound of the wind whistling through a broken pane and the rain tapping on the awning outside. I pulled out my radio, calling the construction company's dispatch center, even though I knew the signal here was weak. "Dispatch. This is Thorne. Are you sure the St. Jude building is completely empty? Are there any squatters or private security guards stationed here?" Static crackled, then the sleepy voice of Sam, the dispatcher, answered. "Thorne? No. No one. The police swept the area last month. Clean record. Why? See a ghost?" "No," I lied, my hand still on the light bulb, which was now cooling down. "Just checking. Over." I looked down at the floor inside the guard booth. There they were again. The fragmented red threads. Here, there were more of them, concentrated under the swivel chair, and mixed in with the threads, I saw a needle, a curved, semicircular surgical needle, the kind used for stitching deep wounds. It was gleaming, without a spot of rust, plunged into the plywood desk surface like an affirmation. Someone had been sitting here. Someone had been sitting and sewing something under this light, just before I arrived. The engineer's logic kicked in. Maybe a homeless person tapped into an underground power line. Maybe a junkie looking for shelter from the rain. I had to be careful. Addicts, when cornered, are more dangerous than any collapsing structure. I felt for my waist, checking my Gerber folding knife. It was still there. "All right, Elias," I reassured myself. "You're a 40-year-old man, 6'1" and 200 pounds. You have a helmet and safety boots. You'll be fine." I left the guard booth, deciding to head upstairs. The drawings indicated that the main load-bearing area needing inspection was on the 3rd floor, the intensive care and surgery ward. The stairwell was dark and narrow. My footsteps on the metal steps rang out, clang, 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 sounding like a hammer striking an iron anvil. The air in the stairwell was dense, much harder to breathe than the grand hall. When I reached the 2nd-floor landing, I stopped to catch my breath. Silence descended again. But this time, in the silence, I heard another sound. Very faint, very quiet. Snick, snick. It sounded like 2 pieces of rough cloth rubbing against each other, or scissors cutting paper. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound came from above me, from the 3rd floor. Snick, click, a sound of metal clashing, subtle but distinct. I directed my flashlight beam upward. The spiral staircase was deep and dark, showing only dust motes floating in the light beam. "Hey!" I called out loudly, my voice sharp. "This is a dangerous construction zone. You need to leave immediately." There was no reply. The snick-snick sound also vanished. I gripped the stair rail, feeling the peeling paint beneath my leather glove. Should I turn back? No. If I reported an incomplete survey because I heard strange noises, I'd be the laughingstock of the whole company. And I needed this money to pay the lawyer fees. I continued climb, step by step. 3rd floor. The heavy fire door was ajar. A blue plastic mica plaque on the door read in white letters, "Anatomy and Surgery Ward." But something was wrong with this plaque. I shone the light closer. The plaque had been broken in half, and someone had repaired it. Not with tape, not with glue. The 2 pieces of mica plastic were joined together by tiny drilled holes, and threaded through them were intricate red threads, sewn together in a meticulous herringbone stitch. A shudder ran down my spine. Who would take the time to sew a plastic sign? And how did they drill such tiny, evenly spaced holes in hard plastic without shattering it? I pushed the door open. The hinge shrieked a long, mournful cry like a cat's meow. The third-floor corridor stretched out before me, deep and dark. The white ceramic tiles on the wall had turned a sickly yellow. On the floor, pools of standing water reflected the flickering flashlight beam, and the smell here was completely different. No more chlorine smell. The third floor was heavy with the stench of formaldehyde, embalming fluid, and lurking somewhere, a sickly, nauseatingly sweet odor of decomposing flesh clumsily masked by cheap perfume. I stepped into the corridor. The flashlight beam swept over discarded stretchers along the walkway. Under my feet, the red threads reappeared. This time, they were no longer fragments. They were longer, following one another, forming a broken trail leading deeper into the darkness, towards the operating room at the end of the hall. I swallowed, my throat dry. Instinct told me to turn back. But my feet, compelled by humanity's fatal curiosity, kept following those red threads. And I realized, the silence on this third floor was not empty. It was holding its breath, waiting for me. I crouched to pick up what I thought was a torn piece of rubber glove, until I realized it had fingerprints. The third-floor corridor extended like a throat swallowing the light. My flashlight, despite being an expensive tactical model, could only carve a small hole in the dense darkness ahead. The doors to the patient rooms on either side were wide open or slightly ajar, looking like the dark, hollow eye sockets of a skull. I walked, trying to keep my breathing steady. The soles of my safety boots grinding on shards of broken glass and fallen plaster created a grating, crunching sound that broke the suffocating stillness. Under my feet, the red threads were still there. They were no longer scattered aimlessly. They seemed to have an intention. Some short segments lay parallel like train tracks, others twisted into complex knots I had never seen in any engineering manual. I stopped in front of room 304. A large pile of medical waste blocked the doorway. Rotten cardboard boxes, broken glass bottles, and stacks of yellowed patient records. It seemed that when the hospital was evacuated, they left everything here in a chaotic rush. My light beam swept across the mess and stopped at a pale yellow object on the blue ceramic tile floor. It looked like a torn piece of medical rubber glove, a disposable latex glove. It was curled up, dry. With the meticulous nature of an engineer specialized in fault finding, I knelt down. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was looking for an excuse, a piece of material evidence to anchor my mind to reality, to tell myself, "See, Elias, this is just garbage. Don't be paranoid." I put on my leather glove and gingerly picked up the rubber piece. It was feather light, but the tactile sensation through my glove felt wrong. Latex rubber after 10 years should be aged, brittle, and sticky. But this, it was tough. It had the dry elasticity of parchment. I held it close to the flashlight, squinting for a closer look. Its surface wasn't smooth. It had tiny, crisscrossing ridges. I flipped the other side over. My heart seized, an invisible punch hitting my chest. On the edge of that piece of rubber, I saw the characteristic spiral patterns, the unique, bumpy ridges. Fingerprints. This was not a rubber glove. This was skin. The skin of a thumb, peeled off whole and flattened. I let go with a start. The piece of skin fell to the ground, fluttering in the air like a dry leaf before landing softly on the floor. What the hell? I backed up, hitting the wall. Nausea hit me, rising to my throat. From source: 155 to 156. I covered my mouth, trying to swallow the bitter bile that had just surged up. Calm down, Elias. Think. Use your head. This is a hospital. Anatomy ward. Maybe this is a speci amen for medical students? A forgotten part of a donated cadaver? Or perhaps artificial silicone skin used for practicing sutures? Right. Artificial skin. Technology makes it look very real now. It must be artificial skin. I tried to cling to that hypothesis. I took a deep breath, but I immediately regretted it. The formaldehyde smell here was so pungent it made my eyes water. That acrid smell was trying to cover up another odor, the sickly sweet stench of rotting flesh in a closed, airless environment. I shone the flashlight back onto the piece of skin on the floor. This ame, I noticed the edges carefully. Along the ray of the skin were rows of tiny, evenly spaced pinholes, each exactly a millimeter apart. Needle holes. This piece of skin had been sewn onto something, or was sewn onto something, and then it was ripped off, or the thread broke, leaving the perforated edges like a postage stamp. I didn't dare pick it up again. I hurried past the pile of garbage, going deeper into the corridor. I needed to finish this job as quickly as possible and get out of here. Ahead was the surgical practice room area. The large metal double doors had been removed, revealing the vast room inside. In the middle of the room were 3 stainless steel operating tables, thick with dust. In the corner were glass cabinets for instruments, empty inside. But what caught my attention were the mannequins. They were anatomical models used for teaching. Some were full-body models, some were just torsos. They stood or lay scattered in the room, pale pink plastic skin, lifeless. I stepped in, the light sweeping across their stiff plastic faces. The feeling of the wrongness hit me, stronger than ever. There was a mannequin sitting on a stool in the corner of the room. It was a CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation model, the kind people call Resusci Anne. But this Anne looked different. I walked closer, clutching the bolt cutters like a self-defense weapon, even though logic told me I was threatening a chunk of plastic. When the light shone directly on the mannequin's face, I froze. Its plastic face was no longer smooth. It was covered in patches, pieces of skin, real skin. They were mismatched in color. A dark brown patch on the forehead, a pale white patch on the left cheek, and a freckled patch of skin on the chin. All were stitched together with that bright red thread. The stitching technique was horrifyingly crude yet sophisticated. Overcast stitches ran along the seams, stretching the dry pieces of skin tightly over the plastic face underneath. And the mouth, the mannequin's mouth, originally parted for resuscitation practice, was now sewn tightly shut. Its 2 lips, or rather the 2 pieces of bruised lip skin applied over it, were sealed with tight cross stitches. The threads cut deeply into the dry flesh, creating puckered wrinkles. I felt my hair stand on end. This was no student prank. Nobody jokes around like this. This level of detail, this morbid meticulousness. It takes teame. It takes patience. And it requires material. I looked down at the mannequin's chest. A plastic name tag was pinned to the old white lab coat it was wearing. The name on the tag was written in black marker. Sample no. 1. Failure. Skin incompatible. The handwriting was neat, flowing, like that of doctors from a bygone era. Clatter. A sound echoed behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam sweeping wildly. A glass medicine bottle on the shelf had just fallen to the floor, shattering. Brown glass fragments scattered everywhere. No wind, no rats. The bottle was deep on the shelf. It couldn't have fallen on its own unless someone pushed it from behind. But the cabinet was flush against the wall. "Who's there?" I growled, my voice more shaky than I wanted to admit. "Show yourself. I'm armed." Silence. Only my own echo reverberated off the cold brick walls. But then, I heard it. Footsteps. Not the sound of shoes hitting the floor, but a soft thud. 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 The sound of bare flesh slapping against the cold tile floor. It came from the corridor, just outside the practice room. Its rhythm was strange, uneven. Thud. Drag. Thud. Drag. As if one leg was walking normally, while the other was being dragged because it was too long or too short. I turned off the flashlight. It was a survival instinct. In the darkness, I had an advantage over standing in the light beam like a target. I pressed myself against the cold steel operating table, my heart pounding painfully against my ribs. The footsteps stopped right in front of the door. I held my breath, gripping the bolt cutters so hard my knuckles turned white. In the dim light, thanks to the faint glow spilling from the corridor window, I saw a long shadow cast upon the floor. That shadow, it was completely anatomically incorrect. Its upper body was too large, lumpy, covered in bizarre protuberances, and one of its arms hung loosely below its knee, dangling as if it had no bone. The shadow stood still for about 10 seconds. I felt like it was sniffing, smelling my fear, smelling my frantic heartbeat. Then, it turned away. Thud. Drag. Thud. Drag. The footsteps faded away towards the end of the corridor, where the main operating room was. I exhaled sharply, my lungs burning from lack of oxygen. Cold sweat broke out all over my back. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out of this room. But the only way out was the corridor that thing had just passed through. I turned on the flashlight at its lowest setting, partially covering the lens with my finger to reveal only a tiny slit of light. I crept out of the practice room, keeping away from the mannequin with the human skin face. As I stepped into the corridor, my gaze inadvertently swept over the whiteboard hanging on the opposite nurse's station, the one I had missed on the way in. On the dust-covered whiteboard, lines written in bright red marker, the exact color of the threads, stood out clearly. The writing was fresh, not yet blurred by dust. Ward rules. Modified. Silence. Noise breaks the thread. Do not run. Running tears the skin. Do not let it see your open wounds. It is always looking for patches. If you hear scissors, stand still and hold your breath. I looked down at the back of my right hand. A long scratch, about 3 centimeters, was oozing fresh blood. Maybe I scraped it when breaking the chain earlier, or when I bumped into the wall. Blood. Open wound. And from deep in the darkness, at the end of the corridor, where the grotesque shadow had vanished, a sound echoed. Snick. Snick. The sound of 2 sharp metal scissor blades scraping against each other. It knew I was here. Rule number 4. If you hear scissors, stand still and hold your breath. My engineer's brain screamed that this was the stupidest thing in the world, but my body, a biological machine programmed for survival, automatically froze. I stood, rooted in the dark corridor, my right hand clenched against my left chest as if to keep my heart from jumping out. My flashlight was off, leaving only the dim, ghostly light of the moon filtering through the dirty window glass. Snick, snick. The sound came again. It was closer. It wasn't the sound of random metal clashing. It had a rhythm, opening, closing, cutting something invisible in the air. I held my breath. My lungs began to burn. I counted silently in my head. 1, 2, 3. The sound moved. It wasn't coming towards me, but moving past me. It was coming from inside the drywall partition on the left. Something was moving in the space between the walls, or in the ventilation duct running along the corridor. The cutting sound dragged, accompanied by a rustling noise like silk rubbing against metal. Then it stopped. Silence returned, doubly heavy. I waited a full 2 more minutes before daring to breathe out. A shaky, broken breath. I turned on the flashlight at its lowest setting, shining it directly onto the back of my hand. Blood was still oozing from the scratch, bright red and warm. Rule number 3. Do not let it see your open wounds. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in load-bearing structures, in material durability, in gravity, but I also know this. When you are alone in someone else's territory, obeying the house rules is the only way to survive, no matter how insane those rules are. I set the bolt cutters down, as gently as possible, rummaging in my jacket pocket. I pulled out a roll of black electrical tape, an essential item for construction workers. I bit off a section of tape and wrapped it tightly around the wound on my hand. Blood soaked the adhesive, making it slippery, but I tightened it until my fingers were numb. Had to cover it up. Had to hide this sweet, metallic smell. Finished, I turned back to look at the whiteboard at the nurse's station. Now I dared to look at it closely. The nurse's station looked like a small, abandoned fortress. Papers were scattered, the desk phone ripped out of its cord. I walked closer to the board. The smell of the oil-based marker was still strong. I reached out my gloved index finger and lightly touched the last letter of rule number 4. The ink smudged. It was wet. This line had been written no more than an hour ago. My back ran cold. Someone was here. Not a ghost. A psycho. A pervert lurking in the shadows of this damn hospital, playing cat and mouse with me. He saw me come in. He wrote these lines to scare me. All right, I whispered, my voice sounding distorted in the cramped space. You want to play a scare game? I'm going to call the police and have you arrested. I pulled out my cell phone. No service. Of course, the lead walls of the X-ray room and this thick reinforced concrete structure are the enemies of cell signals. I looked back at the board. Besides the 4 rules I read, in the bottom corner was a smaller, hastily written line, the handwriting shaky and distinctly different from the neat script above. It hates fire, but fire also makes the threads contract faster. Don't burn it unless you have a way out. I swallowed hard. Advice? Or a trap? I decided to check the area behind the nurse's counter. I needed to find a better weapon than the bolt cutters. Or at least an escape route other than the stairwell I just came up. I jumped over the counter, landing on the old linoleum floor. Under my feet, the number of red threads increased dramatically. If in the corridor they were guidelines, here, they resembled a spider web. Red threads were wrapped around chair legs, tied tightly to the handles of file cabinet drawers, and stuffed into the crevices of electrical outlets. I tried to pull open a desk drawer. It didn't budge. I shone the light into the gap. Inside, hundreds of taut red threads were holding the drawer slide tight. They were crisscrossed, forming a perfect load-bearing structure. I used my utility knife, slashing hard. Snap! Snap! The threads breaking sounded like guitar strings being plucked sharply. The drawer popped open. Inside, there were no patient records. It was filled with needles, all kinds of sewing needles, curved, straight, hooked. Some were brand new, gleaming. Others were rusted, stained with patches of dry brown, old blood. And in the corner of the drawer, an upside-down Polaroid photo. I flipped the photo over. It was a blurry, shaky selfie. In the picture was a man in a security uniform, his face contorted in horror. He was raising his hand to cover his face. But that hand, his pinky and ring finger had been stitched together. The flesh of the two fingers was pulled taut, the black thread piercing the fingernails, forcing them together as one. The corner of the photo had a date written in marker. The 10th of December 2023, just last month. This guard, the one the dispatcher said wasn't there, was here last month. A clicking sound from above me interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. The ventilation grill on the ceiling. Its iron mesh cover was rattling violently. Click, click. The screws holding the vent cover were turning by themselves. No, not by themselves. Something from inside was pushing out, or unscrewing them from the inside. I backed away, hitting the medicine cabinet behind me. From the gap in the vent cover, something slowly poked out. It was thin, long, and red. A thread. Then two. Then a whole bundle of red threads spilled out like the hair of a drowned person, dangling in midair. They were not subject to gravity. They were wriggling. The tips of those threads stretched out, probing the air like anemone tentacles. They were searching. Searching for heat. Searching for movement. Searching for open wounds. I held my breath, pressing myself tightly under the nurse's counter. The black tape on my hand began to peel off from sweat. A small, dark red drop of blood oozed from the edge of the tape, falling to the floor. Plop! The sound of the blood drop hitting the floor was as loud as a sledgehammer. Immediately, the bundle of red threads on the ceiling froze. They all simultaneously pointed their sharp tips toward where I was hiding, and from deep within that dark ventilation duct, a voice echoed. Not the growl of a monster, but a human voice. A crackling, fragmented voice, like it was coming from a speaker with a broken cone. Pain. So much. Who? Cut. My. Threads. That was not a question. It was an accusation. I snatched up the radio, my hand shaking violently, turning the volume knob to max IMM to drown out that disgusting whisper. Mayday. Mayday. This is Thorne. Intruder. I'm trapped on the 3rd floor. Request emergency assistance. The radio crackled. I waited for Sam's lazy voice. But a different sound answered me. Elias? A soft, gentle voice came from the radio. I froze. The radio nearly slipped from my hand. It was Sarah's voice. My wife. The wife who died in a car accident 3 years ago, right before my eyes. Elias. You forgot your raincoat. The voice continued, carrying the static of radio waves, but the cadence was unmistakable. It's cold there. Should I sew your coat back together for you? My wife's voice came from the radio, sweet and warm, but I knew it was a lie. Because the last time I heard that voice, it was choked by blood in a shattered lung cavity. The radio in my hand vibrated violently, burning hot like a live coal. Elias, why aren't you answering me? Are you hiding? Don't hide. Your skin is so cold. Sarah's voice. It was her voice. The slightly low tone. The way she elongated the final syllable whenever she teased me. Everything was painfully perfect. But behind that perfection was a layer of static noise, the crackling of radio waves mixed with a wet slurping sound, like someone was chewing raw meat right next to the microphone. I gritted my teeth, my thumb jamming the power off button. Click. The radio went dead. Silence returned, but only for 2 seconds. Bleep. The green LED on the radio automatically turned back on. The knob spun rapidly even though I hadn't touched it. "You can't turn me off, Elias." The voice changed now. It dropped an octave, becoming deep and distorted, like a warped cassette tape. "I am a part of the structure." I let out a scream of horror and threw the radio violently against the wall. Crash! The plastic casing shattered. The battery flew out. The voice went silent, but immediately, the bundle of red threads from the ceiling vent lunged down. They were faster than I thought. No longer probing, they shot straight at me like a swarm of hungry snakes. The pointed thread tips aimed directly for my neck, my eyes, and my injured hand. It hates fire. The advice on the whiteboard flashed in my mind like lightning. I pulled the Zippo lighter from my pants pocket, the only souvenir left by my father. I flipped the lid open and struck the flint wheel hard. Whoosh! A golden-orange flame erupted, dancing wildly. I brought the flame to the oncoming red threads. A violent reaction happened instantly. The threads did not burn to ash like normal cotton or nylon. They retracted. They writhed, hissing with a painful sizzling sound like fat thrown into a hot pan. A foul burning smell arose, the scent of burnt hair and singed flesh. The bundle of threads snapped back violently into the vent, followed by the loud clang of metal hitting metal in the ductwork. I didn't wait to see if they would return. I lunged out from behind the nurse's counter, running back towards the corridor. But rule number 2, do not run. Running tears the skin. I forced myself to slow down, switching to a fast, long, and light step as much as possible. Every step was a tense calculation. My heart was pounding, threatening to burst out of my chest. I needed to find a way out. The stairwell? No. The ventilation ducts run along the axis of the building. If that thing is in the duct, it will cut me off at the stairs. The elevator? Dead. I saw a sign. Pediatrics Ward, East Wing. There might be an auxiliary fire escape in the East Wing. I turned left, entering the pediatrics ward. The atmosphere here was completely different. The walls were painted with cheerful animals, bears, rabbits, giraffes, but Tayam and mildew had turned them into grotesque mottled monstrosities. The rabbit's paint was peeling, revealing the gray plaster beneath like a skull. From source: 409 to 410. The bear's eyes streamed with black streaks of water. The rabbit's paint was peeling, revealing the gray plaster beneath like a skull. I walked about 20 meters and stopped. There was a sound ahead, not metal, nor was it the soft thud, drag, thud of the footsteps from before. It was my footsteps. Clomp, clomp. The sound of safety boot soles hitting the floor. I stopped. The other footsteps also stopped, but one beat later than me. I took one test step. Clomp. The shadow ahead, hidden behind the L-shaped corner of the corridor, also took one step. Clomp. It was Maya micking me. A chill ran down my spine. I turned off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the corridor, leaving only the weak light filtering through the dirty windows from the streetlights outside. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. From the corner ahead, a shadow slowly emerged. It was tall, very tall, easily over 7 feet, but it was skinny, wearing an orange reflective work jumpsuit, exactly like the one I was wearing. I squinted. My heart felt like it stopped. That wasn't a person wearing a jumpsuit. It was a pile of flesh and fabric stitched together to look like a jumpsuit. The reflective strips were stapled directly into the flesh, with industrial staples. The helmet on its head was actually a section of human skull encased in plastic, the plastic edge stitched into the forehead skin. And the face. It had no face. Its face was a flat, smooth expanse of skin, without eyes, without a nose, only a horizontal slit where the mouth should be, crudely sewn with a few sparse red stitches. It stood there, tilting its head to one side. Its neck was bent at a 90-degree angle, an angle a human spine cannot achieve without breaking. Then, the slit in its mouth twitched. The red threads stretched, and a few snapped with a faint pop. From that ripped mouth, the sound emerged. "Elias, you forgot your raincoat." Still, Sarah's voice. But this aim, it wasn't through the radio. It came from the throat of this monster. The sound echoed in the hollow corridor, carrying a physical reverberation, proving it was here, physically present before me. It stepped forward. The way it moved was a blasphemy against nature. Its knees bent backward like a grasshopper's legs. Its two arms swung weightlessly, the shoulder joints rattling loosely, like iron balls clanking together in a cloth sack. It was experimenting. It was learning how to control this newly patched-up body. I backed away, fumbling behind me. Door handle. Room 402. I turned the doorknob. Locked. Damn it. The monster, the imitator, seemed to sense my panic. It sped up. The fake clomp-clomp footsteps vanished, replaced by the quick glide of bare flesh. It wasn't walking anymore. It lunged. Its two long arms stretched out. Its fingers, made of rusty surgical scalpels, plunged into the ends of its finger bones, splayed out like Annie-Amal claws. I retreated to the next room. Room 401. The door was ajar. I rushed inside, slammed the door shut, and locked the deadbolt. Thud. The wooden door rattled violently. An immense force hit it from the outside. Elias, open the door for me. I want to try on your skin. The voice shifted from sweet to a maniacal shriek, hissing like metal grinding on glass. I backed away, panting. This room was an old pediatric room. Rusted iron cribs lay abandoned. I looked down at the gap beneath the door. Its shadow was standing still there. And then I saw them. The red threads. Hundreds of red threads snaked through the gap under the door, entering the room like earthworms seeking a path after the rain. They crawled onto the floor, heading towards me. But this Teame, they weren't just crawling. They began to weave. Right before my eyes, the red threads intertwined, forming the shape of a hand rising from the floor, grasping for my ankle. I kicked violently, my safety boot sole grinding the threads. But they were too tough. They wrapped tightly around my ankle, tightening. I fell forward onto the floor. The flashlight flew away, rolling under a crib. The spinning light created chaotic streaks on the walls. In that flickering light, I saw the ceiling of this room. It wasn't drywall. The ceiling was entirely covered by old children's clothes. Sweaters, dresses, bibs. But they weren't hung up. They were stitched together. And inside those clothes, there were lumps, twitching and moving. This entire room was a stomach, and I had just locked myself inside its belly. The room door began to splinter. The monster's scalpel fingers outside were boring through the wood, carving a hole large enough for its faceless head to peek through. I see you. The thing standing by the operating table did not turn its back, but its head rotated 180 degrees, with a crunch of breaking neck bones, revealing a face sewn from 3 pieces of skin, belonging to 3 different people. The oak door of room 401 was warping. Cracks spread out like spider webs, revealing sharp wooden splinters. From outside, the monster, the imitator, was frantically gouging. Its scalpel fingers sliced through the wood as easily as a hot knife through butter, twisting violently to widen the hole. I'm cold. Elias, open the door. My wife's voice had now completely lost its humanity, becoming a malfunctioning, rapidly repeating recording, shrill and piercing. Around my feet, the red threads had clamped tightly around my right ankle. They tightened so hard, I felt my flesh being sliced through the thick sock. Blood pooled, my pulse throbbing in resistance. I couldn't use the main door. The window? The window was blocked by solid security bars from the 90 seconds. I looked at the wall separating me from the next room, room 403. This was an old hospital. The walls between patient rooms were usually reinforced wooden frame drywall, not load-bearing concrete. I roared, putting all my remaining strength into my left foot, the free one, kicking violently at the red threads wrapping my right foot. Snap! A few threads broke, but the rest tightened even more. No other choice. I pulled out the Zippo lighter again. My hand shaking, I lit it and aimed the flame directly at my ankle. The flame licked the leg of my jeans, catching the threads. Sizzle! A piercing hiss came from the threads like boiling fat. They convulsed violently and then slackened, quickly retreating into the floor gap. I also screamed in pain as the heat hit my skin. But I was free. I scrambled up, lunging towards the partition wall. I used the handheld bolt cutters, nearly 2 kilograms of cast steel, smashing hard against the wall's surface. Crash! The old plaster shattered, and white dust flew everywhere. A fist-sized hole appeared. I kept hitting. Smash! Smash! The plaster peeled away, revealing the inner wall structure. But instead of yellow or pink fiberglass insulation, the material packed inside the wall was hair. Thick bundles of black hair, tightly braided, reeking of a disgusting mildew smell. They were stuffed tightly into the gap between the two walls. I didn't have aim to be disgusted. The door to room 401 behind me had burst open. The imitator had squeezed half its body through, its faceless head turning back and forth, searching for my body heat. I closed my eyes, throwing myself hard against the weakened section of the wall. The whole section of wall collapsed. I tumbled into room 403, my face landing in a sticky bundle of black hair that had spilled from the partition. I coughed violently, spitting out threads of hair, then scrambled up and ran into the corridor. The corridor outside had changed now. It was no longer a straight hospital corridor. The walls seemed to be breathing. The peeling wallpaper pulsed with a slow rhythm. The ceiling lowered, pressing close to my head. And the light. The fluorescent bulbs on the ceiling flickered wildly, but did not emit a bluish-white light. They emitted a murky red light, as if the current running through them was blood instead of electrons. I ran towards the central area. The thud. Drag. Thud. Drag. Footsteps were close behind. The imitator moved with absurd speed, crawling on all fours, slithering on the walls and ceiling like a giant lizard made of human flesh. Fire escape! Where's the fire escape? I screamed in my head. The green exit sign at the end of the corridor beckoned. I rushed towards it, but as I got closer, the exit door vanished. It wasn't locked. It disappeared. The smooth brick wall filled the space where the door should have been, leaving only the exit sign hanging mockingly above. The space was playing with me. The building's structure was rewriting itself. Only one door was open at the opposite end of the hall. A double door, painted surgical blue, with a brightly lit N surgery sign above it. O.R. 4. Operating room. No. 4. I had no choice. Either go in there, or be torn apart by the monster behind me. I lunged through the double doors, latching the horizontal bar tightly. Bang! The imitator slammed into the door. The metal door buckled inward with a large dent, but the hinges held. The sound of scraping and scratching shrieked outside, then fell silent. It wasn't breaking the door anymore. It knew I had walked into its trap. This place was not a sanctuary. This was the destination it wanted to herd me into. I turned around, my back against the door, gasping for breath. Operating room 4 was vast and colder than anywhere else in the building. The temperature here must have been below freezing. My breath formed thick fog. In the middle of the room, under the blindingly bright surgical light, despite there being no power source, was an operating table, and someone was standing next to the operating table, a tall figure wearing a blood-stained white lab coat that had turned brown. He was bent over, intently working on the patient lying on the table. The clinking sound of metal instruments, the snick-snick of scissors cutting cloth, the swishing sound of a needle piercing flesh. "Excuse me." I spoke, my voice hoarse, gripping the bolt cutters tightly. I'm lost. The most idiotic lie in the world. The shadow stopped working. He stood still, his back still towards me. He was at least a head taller than me. His shoulders were thin but unusually broad. Lost? A voice spoke. No. It was many voices speaking at once. The deep voice of a man, the clear voice of a woman, a child's voice, an old person's voice, all layered over one another, creating a distorted, chilling chord. No one is lost in St. Jude, Elias Thorne. Every tear finds its way back to the needle. He knew my name. Then, he turned around. No, he didn't turn his body. His feet were still facing the operating table. His torso was still facing the operating table. Only his head rotated. Crack. The dry sound of a neck bone breaking echoed like a dry branch snapping. The head rotated 180 degrees backwards to look at me. I froze. The bolt cutters slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a clang. That was the Stitcher. His face was a masterpiece of horror. It was patched together from 3 different pieces of skin. The left piece was the skin of a black man, the right piece was the pale skin of an elderly woman, and the forehead was a scarred, tanned patch of skin. They were sewn together with red thread, the stitches running crisscross along the bridge of the nose, through the eye sockets, and across the mouth. His left eye was a lifeless blue glass eye. His right eye. He had no right eye. Only a dark, hollow socket, inside which glittered the metallic sheen of dozens of sewing needles plunged tightly into the empty socket. He stepped backward towards me, though his face was looking at me, his feet were retreating. That reverse movement made my stomach clench. You carry a tear. He pointed towards my right hand, where I had wrapped the black tape. A tear must be sewn. Rules are rules. He raised his 2 hands. They weren't hands. His arms were long, and instead of 5-fingered hands, he had surgical tools growing from his wrists. The left arm ended in a curved medical clamp. The right arm was a gigantic steel sewing needle, about 20 centimeters long, threaded with a rope-sized red thread, wet with fresh blood. He lunged. His speed was not as fast as the imitators, but it was decisive and accurate. No wasted motion. I dodged to the left, grabbing a surgical tray and throwing it at Hyam. Clang! The tray hit Hyam and fell. He didn't flinch. The gigantic needle in his right hand swung up, plunging into the metal door behind me, piercing the thick steel as if it were paper. Let me repair you, the corded voice echoed, morbidly gentle. You will be more beautiful patched up. Your wife will like this new skin. I rolled on the floor, avoiding the horizontal sweep of the medical clamp. I hit the leg of the operating table. It was then I saw clearly what was on the operating table. It wasn't a person. It was a nightmare version of a human centipede, a chain of severed arms, stitched end to end into a long segment, twitching weakly. I vomited right there. The stitcher was close. He leaned down, his broken neck dangling close to my face. The smell of rotting flesh and antiseptic shot straight into my nose. Don't resist. The stitch is more beautiful when the cloth is still. The gigantic needle lowered, aiming directly for my shoulder. I rolled to the side just in time. The needle plunged into the tiled floor, sparks flying. I looked around for a weapon. Nothing but dull, rusted surgical scissors and knives. But my eyes stopped at the corner of the room. Oxygen tanks. 2 large green medical oxygen tanks, leaning against the wall, covered in dust. And next to them was a glass cabinet containing 90-proof alcohol, an ether flammable liquid anesthetic. It hates fire. I scrambled up, running towards the glass cabinet. The stitcher pulled the needle from the floor, turning his body, this Team, rotating his hip, accompanied by the clanking sound of his hip bones. He advanced, slowly, enjoying my fear. I punched through the glass cabinet, grabbing the large bottle of ether. Hey! I yelled, raising the bottle of ether towards Hyam. The patched-up head tilted to one side. Anesthetic? Do you want to sleep? I can sew your eyelids shut so you can sleep forever. No, I roared. I want you to burn. I threw the bottle of ether hard at Hyam. The glass bottle shattered against his chest. The liquid splashed everywhere, soaking his filthy lab coat and seeping into the suture lines on his body. I flipped open the Zippo, lit it, and threw it towards Hyam. Whoom! The flame erupted violently, engulfing the stitcher's upper body. He roared. The roar was not that of an animal, but the high-pitched shriek of thousands of threads being burned at once. The red threads on his body contracted frantically under the heat. His flesh was pulled taut, ripping apart. The patched pieces of skin burst open, revealing the body beneath, a raw, skinless mass of muscle bundles and blood vessels writhing. Hot, so hot, the threads are breaking, the threads are breaking! He screamed, his 2 arms flailing wildly, knocking over the operating table and surrounding cabinets. I seized the opportunity, lunging towards a small door hidden behind a curtain in the corner of the room. A door that usually led to a sterile washroom or a doctor's changing room. I kicked the door open and rushed in. But behind the door was not a changing room. I missed my step. There was no floor. I fell freely into a dark, slippery, and moist chute. The strong, metallic smell of blood enveloped me. The walls of this chute were soft, warm, and elastic. I was sliding through the building's intestines. Triple-A, my scream echoed, mixing with the painful cries of the burning stitcher above. I slid down, deeper and deeper, until I was ejected and landed with a soft thump onto a soft, spongy, waterlogged surface. I lifted my head, coughing violently. Around me was a vast, dimly lit space, crisscrossed with colossal columns, but those columns were covered in human skin. And the floor under my hands pulsed. I had fallen into the basement, or something worse than a basement. I ran back towards the lit exit sign at the end of the corridor, but the steel fire door had vanished. Instead, a gigantic membrane of human skin was stretched taut like a drumhead, sewn tightly to the door frame with thousands of thick black stitches. I lay prone on the soft floor, gasping for breath. With every inhale, my lungs filled with humid air, thick with the metallic smell of rust and digestive enzymes. I propped myself up. My hands sank into the floor. I shone the flashlight down. Not tile, not concrete. The floor was paved with millions of small square pieces of skin, each about the size of a hand, patched together. Some pieces had coarse, large pores. Some were smooth. Some were covered in age spots. And the gaps between the pieces of skin, where the cement grout should have been, were lines of red thread oozing a black liquid. I was standing on a colossal rug of human skin. "Oh God," I mumbled, trying to suppress the nausea rising in my throat. I stood up, staggering. The fall from the operating room must have fractured my ribs. Every movement was a sharp pain. But adrenaline was pumping into my blood like a drug, keeping me alert. I looked around. This was the basement. According to the structural drawings, this was the area for the boiler, backup generators, and sewage treatment system. This place should have been 50 centimeters thick reinforced concrete, cold and dry. But now, it looked like the internal organs of a gigantic creature. The hot water pipes wrapped in insulation running along the ceiling were now pulsing, contracting in rhythm. The insulation layer had transformed into dark red muscle fibers. The sound of water running in the pipes gurgled like blood circulating in the aorta. Thump! 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 A low, deep beat echoed throughout the space, shaking the floor beneath my feet. That was not a generator. That was a heartbeat. I had to find a way out. I remembered the location of the basement fire escape stairs in the north side of the building. I started running. My steps sank into the soft, fleshy floor, making wet, thudding sounds. I rounded a corner, where the electrical equipment room should have been, but the brick wall here had been swallowed. A layer of translucent slime covered the wall, and inside that membrane, I saw electrical circuit boards and cables being digested, melting into a pile of black plastic. Ahead, the green exit sign was still lit. That was the only thing that retained its normal appearance. I rushed towards it, hope surging. The steel fire door. Just open it, and I would be on the stairwell leading straight out to the back parking lot. But when I arrived, I braked hard. There was no door. The door frame was still there, painted gray steel, but the space inside the frame was sealed shut. It was sealed by a gigantic membrane of human skin, stretched taut like a drum skin. This skin wasn't patched from many small pieces, but a single, large, continuous, pale, smooth patch. And it was sewn to the steel frame with a thick, crude black thread, distinctly different from the stitcher's delicate red thread. The stitches were brutal, haphazard, piercing through the hard steel as if the steel were soft wax. I pulled out my Gerber knife, the sharp 10 centimeters blade gleaming. "Open up!" I roared, stabbing hard into the skin membrane. Thwack! The blade went through. A stream of black blood gushed out, spraying my face. It was scalding hot. The skin membrane flinched. A low, deep moan came from the door itself. A heavy, painful groan. I pulled the knife out, slashing a long line from top to bottom. Slice! Blood and pus gushed out like a stream. The skin ripped open, contracting to both sides, revealing the passageway behind. But behind the door was not a fire escape. It was another wall of flesh. And behind that wall was another wall. Layers upon layers of flesh, blocking every exit. I was locked in St. Jude's stomach, and the stomach was starting to digest. The walls of the corridor on both sides began to move. They inflated, deflated, and slowly closed in on each other. The space was contracting. Peristalsis. My high school biology knowledge rushed back. The building was trying to crush me. I turned and ran back. But the path behind was also changing. Red threads sprouted from under the floor like weeds, wrapping around my feet, making me stumble constantly. Elias. The imitator's voice came again. But this Te Ame. It wasn't coming from a specific direction. It echoed from everywhere. From the ceiling, from the floor, from the flesh walls. The whole building was calling my name, your skin. It's so itchy. Let me scratch it for you. I saw a large ventilation duct lying low near the floor, its mesh cover ripped open. About 60 centimeters in diameter, enough for a person to crawl through. I had no other choice. I lunged, crawling into the duct. Inside the duct was dark and cramped, but at least it was made of cold, galvanized metal, not flesh. I crawled on my elbows and knees, the metal ringing clang-clang. I crawled about 10 meters and stopped. Ahead of me, the duct was blocked. Not blocked by trash. It was blocked by a gigantic hairball. Black hair, long, wet, braided tightly together like a cork. I used my knife to cut into the hairball. Slash. The hairball flinched, and from the middle of the tangled hair, an eye opened. A human eye the size of a tennis ball, bloodshot, without an eyelid, staring intently at me. I screamed, recoiling, my head hitting the side of the duct hard. The eye blinked once, and then, from inside the hair, tiny, pale fingers reached out, trying to grasp my face. I kicked violently, crawling backward as fast as I could. I tumbled out of the duct, falling onto the soft, fleshy floor outside. The two flesh walls of the corridor had now closed in on each other, only about a meter apart. I was about to be crushed. I looked around in despair. To my left was an old wooden door, a normal office door, looking out of place in this fleshy labyrinth. A brass plaque on the door read, Chief of Anatomical Pathology. I lunged forward, grabbed the doorknob, unlocked. I stumbled inside, slammed the door shut, and leaned my back against it. Outside, a crashing sound echoed as the two corridor walls collided, crushing everything in between. The door vibrated violently, but the frame seemed to be reinforced with something very strong, not giving way. I gasped for breath, looking at the room I had just escaped into. This was an old-style office, dusty but strangely neat. Bookshelves packed with leather-bound medical books, a large mahogany desk, a leather swivel chair with its back to me. And on the walls were not adorned with paintings, they were pinned with sketches. Detailed technical drawings of the human body, but overlaid onto the building's structural plans. I walked closer, shining the flashlight onto the largest drawing in the center. It was a cross-section of St. Jude Hospital, but the load-bearing columns were labeled femur. The water pipe system was labeled artery. The boiler in the basement was labeled heart, and the electrical wiring system was labeled nerves. In the corner of the drawing, there was a handwritten note in red ink, Rebirth Project. Objective, unify, host and architecture. The building is not just a container, it must be the new body. Below that was a flowing signature, Dr. V. A chill went down my spine. The Stitcher. He wasn't an invading monster. He was the doctor of this place. Or perhaps, he was Dr. V, the one who transformed High himself in this building into a symbiotic entity. So, you found my office. The voice came from the leather chair with its back to me. I flinched, pointing the knife at the chair. The chair slowly turned around. There was no one in the chair. Only an empty human skin suit, peeled off whole like a piece of clothing, slumped against the chair. The skin was deflated, shriveled, but the mouth of that skin suit was moving. Invisible red threads were pulling its strings like a puppet. I am not here, Elias, the skin suit said, the voice coming from the hollow throat sounding like wind blowing through a cave. I am everywhere. I am the floor beneath your feet. I am the wall behind your back. And then, the skin suit inflated. It was being pumped with air, or something invisible. It stood up, staggering towards me. You burned my old shell, the skin suit said, its two empty eye sockets staring at me. Now I need a new shell, a healthy shell, an engineer's shell, so I can perfect myself. From the ceiling, a loud RIP echoed. The drywall was torn open. The Stitcher, the charred, smoking version, fell right into the middle of the room. He lunged, faster, more crazed, without any of the surgical elegance he had before. From source, 766 to 772, he looked pathetic and terrifying. Half of his patched skin had been burned away, revealing a metal skeleton and raw red muscle bundles inside. The acrid smell of burnt flesh filled the air, but he still held the gigantic needle. "I'll start with the eyes," he growled, his voice distorted because his vocal cords were damaged by the fire. "An engineer's eyes see the structure. I want them." He lunged, faster, more crazed, without any of the surgical elegance he had before. He was a wounded Anayamal at the end of its rope. I threw the flashlight at his face and turned to run towards the window. This office window overlooked an internal air shaft. The glass was broken. I didn't hesitate, diving through the broken window frame, jumping into the dark void of the air shaft. Behind me, the Stitcher's roar echoed, accompanied by the sound of metal scraping against the stone wall. I fell, the wind whistling past my ears. I hoped the bottom of the air shaft wasn't a waiting mouth. It didn't want to kill me immediately. It was holding my left arm up, placing it against its empty shoulder socket and nodding with satisfaction, like a tailor trying on a new sleeve for an expensive suit. The fall didn't kill me, but it took a piece of my soul. I landed on a soft pile of garbage, reeking of a strong stench. As I scrambled to get up, shining my flashlight down to see what I was standing on, I wished I had broken my neck and died instantly. That wasn't garbage. It was byproducts. Piles of severed arms, legs, and even human faces that had been stripped but discarded because they didn't meet the standards. They were piled up like mounds, rotting, oozing yellow fluid, but strangely, they hadn't completely decomposed. The cold, chemically saturated environment at the bottom of this air shaft had preserved them in a state of eternal semi-decomposition. I dry heaved, but my empty stomach only contracted painfully. I looked up. The air shaft was deep and dark, like a giant Kyamni leading to hell. Above it, the Stitcher's cries still echoed down, but they were fading. He was finding a way down here. I had to move. I climb over the pile of byproducts, slipping on the slick patches of skin. In front of me was a heavy, rusted steel double door, slightly ajar. An icy cold emanated from it. I squeezed through the gap. The morgue. This was the darkest heart of St. Jude. The space was vast, tiled in white ceramic but stained yellow by Team and bodily fluids. On both sides of the walls were rows of stainless steel body refrigerators, stacked like drawers in a library. But here, the drawers were all open, and inside each drawer, no dead bodies lay at rest. Inside were meticulously sorted parts. First drawer, thumbs, male. Hundreds of thumbs were preserved in glass jars of formaldehyde. Second drawer, eyes, blue. Eyeballs floated, staring at me through the glass. Third drawer, teeth. A pile of clean white teeth, scattered. This wasn't a morgue. This was a parts warehouse. A spare parts store for the human body. I walked deeper inside, my steps cautious on the wet floor. In the center of the room, under the light of a single surgical lamp, that same illogical warmth, was a large metal table. And on the table was the work. I stopped short, holding my breath. It was a body being completed. A man. Or rather, an entity in the shape of a man. It was terrifyingly perfect. Voluminous muscles grafted from the freshest flesh. Skin patched from the smoothest, most flawless pieces. The suture lines here were incredibly delicate, tiny, almost invisible, unlike the crude stitches on the monsters upstairs. But it wasn't finished. It was missing a left arm. It was missing its eyes. And its chest cavity was wide open, revealing an empty space without a heart. I shivered. The drawing in Dr. V's office. Rebirth project. He was building a new body for Hai himself. A perfect body to house that twisted soul. CLang. A metallic sound echoed from the entrance, where I had just entered. I spun around. The Stitcher was standing there. He looked more miserable than ever. Half of his body was charred black, revealing a metal skeleton and roasted muscle bundles. One side of his face was melted, the glass eye gone, leaving only a deep, hollow socket. The acrid smell of burnt flesh emanated from Hai Am, overpowering even the embalming fluid. But he was still standing, and in his hand, he still brandished the gigantic sewing needle. "You," he hissed, his voice fragmented, gravelly like stones grinding together. "You dared to ruin my temporary shell." He shuffled forward. Squeak, squeak. The metal at his knee joints grated piercingly. I backed away, hitting the operating table holding the work. But it's all right, he continued, his charred head tilted to one side. You brought replacement material. He lunged. His lunge was no longer agile, but it was heavy with momentum. I dodged to the left, but his long, charred arm swept against my shoulder. Crack! I heard the dry snap of my collarbone. The blinding pain made me collapse to the floor. Before I could recover, he was on top of me. His weight was like a boulder. His clamping hand squeezed my neck tightly, lifting me off the ground. I struggled, my legs kicking in the air, my hands clawing at his charred arm. His burnt flesh peeled off in chunks, sticking to my fingernails. But he didn't seem to feel pain. He didn't kill me. He brought me close to the work on the operating table. He took my left arm, my only uninjured arm, and placed it parallel to the missing shoulder of the body on the table. Perfect, he whispered, his voice filled with morbid adoration. Bone length, muscle firmness, shoulder joint. Perfect. He turned to look at me with his remaining eye. Don't be afraid, Elias. You won't die. You will become a part of greatness. This arm will build the new world. He let me go, but I immediately used the clamp on his left arm to pin my wrist tightly to the operating table. I screamed as the cold metal crushed my wrist. He raised his right hand. The gigantic needle with the blood-soaked red thread was pointed directly at my shoulder. He intended to dislocate my shoulder joint. Raw, right here. I looked around in desperation. Next to the operating table was an instrument cart. On it were scalpels, clamps, and a large glass bottle containing a clear liquid with a skull and crossbones label. Formaldehyde, 37%, highly flammable. High concentration embalming fluid, highly flammable, and in my pants pocket, the Zippo lighter was still there, pressing against my thigh. But my right hand had a fractured collarbone, agonizingly painful. I couldn't lift it high. My left hand was clamped tight. The needle began to descend. The sharp tip of the needle touched my shoulder skin, slicing a clean line. Blood spurted out. Endure it, he whispered. Pain is the first stitch. I gritted my teeth, putting all my strength into my legs. I didn't kick Hyam. I kicked the instrument cart. Crash! The cart tipped over. The formaldehyde bottle fell to the ground, shattering right at his feet. The acrid liquid splashed everywhere, soaking his legs, the floor, and me. The stitcher paused, looking down at the mess. You like sewing, right? I roared, my right hand struggling to reach into my pocket, pulling out the lighter. My fingers were slippery with sweat and blood. Idiot! He snarled, turning to squeeze my neck. You ruined my floor! I flipped open the Zippo. Click. No flame. The flint wheel was soaked with sweat. His clamping hand tightened on my throat. My vision began to blur. Black spots danced before my eyes. I struck again. Click. Still no flame. Die. Leave. The arm. He hissed. The third Tayame. I used my scratched thumb, pressing hard on the flint wheel, praying to any remaining god in this hell. Scrape. A spark flashed. I dropped the burning lighter into the puddle of formaldehyde at his feet. Boom! A low explosion echoed. A blue-green flame erupted violently, engulfing the Stitcher's legs. The chemical caught fire extremely fast, spreading up his lab coat, which was saturated with human fat and dried blood. He released me, backing away, screaming. This Tayame, the fire didn't just burn flesh. It burned the connection. The extreme heat of the chemical fire made the red threads on his body. The magic that kept that monstrosity together. Snap, pop, pop continuously. I rolled off the operating table, falling onto the slippery floor, trying to crawl away from the fire. I looked back. A sight, both horrifying and spectacular. The Stitcher was disintegrating. His left arm fell to the ground. Thump. His head detached from his neck, rolling on the floor, but the mouth still screaming, "No! My work!" His chest burst open, and hundreds of rotting internal organs spilled out like a pile of pig entrails. But he wasn't dead. The severed parts were still writhing, trying to crawl back together. Red threads from his bone marrow were still reaching out, desperately trying to reconnect. The fire spread quickly to the body storage cabinets. The entire room turned into a crematorium. The formaldehyde in the specimen jars began to pop, shooting glass and fire everywhere. I have to go. Right now. I saw a manhole cover in the corner of the room, behind the burning body storage cabinets. A drain access cover. That was the only way out. I clutched my painful shoulder, dragging myself towards the manhole cover. The heat behind me was immense. I used the bolt cutters, still tucked into my belt, thank God, to pry the manhole cover open. From source 908 to 910, the building began to shake. The roaring was no longer just the Stitchers, but St. Jude hospitals. The tiled walls began to crack, oozing blood. The ceiling sagged like a fat belly. I used the bolt cutters, still tucked into my belt, thank God, to pry the manhole cover open. Heavy. Too heavy. "Come on, Elias!" I shouted at myself. Clank. The manhole cover popped open. A stench of sewage wafted up. But to me now, it was the smell of freedom. I was about to jump down when an icy hand clamped onto my ankle. I turned back. The ambulous torso of the Stitcher, now just a charred skeleton with a few patches of flesh clinging to it, had crawled over. He had no eyes, no lower jaw, but his bony hand still held onto me tightly. Red threads from his fingers began to pierce through the skin of my ankle, trying to sew me to Hi-Am. "Stay. With me." A voice echoed directly in my head, not through my ears. I raised my other foot, kicking hard at his shattered skull. "Go to hell," crunch. The skull shattered under the heel of my safety boot. The bony hand slackened its grip. I let myself fall into the dark sewer, just as the ceiling of the morgue collapsed, burying the perfect work and the insane doctor in an eternal sea of fire. The police said no one was found in the hospital, and the case was closed as an industrial accident due to gas inhalation. But this morning, as I shaved in the mirror, I saw a red thread sticking out of the corner of my eye, and when I tried to pull it, I felt a sharp pain in my brain. Escape from the sewer. I don't remember how long I crawled in that sewer. Ame seemed to melt in the thick darkness, mixed with the smell of mud, sewage, and the metallic aftertaste of blood. My body was numb. My right shoulder was in so much pain I thought I would pass out, but the fear of that bony hand still pushed me forward. The sound of dripping water echoing off the damp concrete walls sounded like chasing footsteps, drip, drip, or thud. Drag? Finally, I saw light. Not the murky red light of St. Jude, but the gray, dim light of dawn. I rolled out of the manhole, falling with a thud onto the gravel bank of the Detroit River. The rain was still falling. The cold raindrops lashed my face, washing away the dried blood and ash. I lay on my back, letting the rain wash over me, letting the bone-chilling cold confirm that I was alive. I turned my head to look back. About 2 miles away, on the desolate hill, St. Jude Memorial Hospital was burning. The fire was not raging fiercely like a normal blaze. It was smoldering from within. Thick columns of black smoke curling up into the gray sky. From the windows of the upper floors, the bright red glow of the fire looked like open, bleeding wounds. The building did not collapse immediately. It seemed to be contracting. The walls bowed inward, the roof sagged. In the howling wind, I swore I heard the groaning of reinforced concrete, a painful, desperate sound of a giant body dying. Then, a massive explosion erupted from underground. Perhaps the boiler, or the formaldehyde storage vault in the basement. The entire building shuddered one last time and collapsed, raising a cloud of dust and debris. I closed my eyes, and darkness enveloped me. I passed out. The denial of reason. I woke up 3 days later at Henry Ford Hospital. A real hospital. The first thing I did when I opened my eyes was not call a doctor, but check the ceiling. White drywall ceiling, clean ventilation grill, no red threads, no hair. I felt my chest. My heart was still beating. I felt my right shoulder. It was bandaged and I immobilized. "You're awake, Mr. Thorne?" A uniformed police officer walked into the room, followed by a doctor. Detective Miller, a middle-aged man with a tired face and skeptical eyes. "We found you unconscious by the riverbank," Miller said, pulling a chair next to the bed. "Your car was still parked in front of St. Jude Hospital. That building burned down completely that night." "Did he?" I whispered, my throat raw. "Is he dead? The Stitcher? And the body? The patched-up body on the operating table?" Miller frowned, exchanging an uneasy look with the doctor. "Mr. Thorne, the fire department and forensics team turned that rubble inside out," Miller said slowly, his tone like he was speaking to a child. "There was no one. No bodies, except for a few rat and feral cat skeletons. Impossible. I tried to jump up, but the pain in my shoulder forced me back down. The basement, the morgue, hundreds of body parts. He killed people. He had a storage vault. The basement was flooded with water and mud, Miller sighed. We found traces of a long-accumulated methane gas explosion and some old chemical drums. You were gassed, Thorne. Plus a head injury and blood loss. Hallucinations are normal. Hallucinations? I gave a bitter laugh. Then what about the wound on my ankle? The wound that was sewn? The doctor stepped forward, pulling back the blanket. My ankle was neatly bandaged. A pretty deep laceration, with signs of tetanus infection, the doctor said. Looks like you got snagged on rusted barbed wire or mesh. We stitched it up for you. 12 stitches. Stitched it up. That word made me jump. I stared at the doctor. His hands were clean. His fingernails were clipped short. But in my mind, the eye image of the scalpel fingers was vivid. They didn't believe me. Of course, who would believe a story about a building that eats people and a doctor who stitches himself together from dead parts? I remained silent. I signed the statement. Industrial accident. Aftermath. 3 months later. I quit my job. I sold the old house, which held too many memories of Sarah, and moved into a small apartment complex in suburban Chicago. I wanted to get away from Detroit, away from old buildings. The physical wounds healed. My collarbone mended. The scars faded. But I wasn't fine. I threw away all my clothes with visible seams. I only wore plain t-shirts and sweatpants. I tossed Sarah's sewing kit in the trash. I didn't even dare to eat steak because the sight of the red muscle made me nauseous. I dream every night. In the dream, I'm not running. I'm lying on the operating table, and the stitcher is leaning over me, his charred head swaying. You think you escaped, Elias. You left your shadow there. And I sewed it to the wall. I often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, and feeling an itch. Not an itch on the surface of the skin. It itches beneath the skin, deep in the muscle fibers, along the spine. A tingling sensation, as if thousands of ants are crawling along my nerves. I went to a dermatologist. The doctor said it was an allergic reaction or nervous tension. They prescribed tranquilizers and topical creams, but the itching didn't stop. It moved. Today on the bicep, tomorrow on the thigh, the day after up to the neck, and I started hearing noises. In the quiet nights, I hear a clicking sound coming from inside my own apartment. I tore up the floorboards, smashed the drywall to search, but found nothing. The neighbors started complaining. The landlord threatened to evict me. They said I was crazy. Maybe I am crazy. The truth in the mirror. This morning, the itching was worse than ever. It was concentrated in my left eye. It felt like a large grain of dust was stuck in my eyelid, scraping against my cornea every time I blinked. I went into the bathroom, turning on the light. The blinding white neon light reflected my gaunt, unshaven face in the mirror. I leaned close to the mirror, pulling my left eyelid open with my finger. My eye was bloodshot, full of red veins, and in the inner corner of the eye, right next to the tear duct, I saw it. A small red dot. I thought it was a blood clot. I gently nudged it with a cotton swab. It didn't dissolve. It was tough. I used tweezers. My hand trembled as I brought the metal tip close to my pupil. Careful, Elias. I managed to clip that tiny tip. I pulled gently. A sharp, piercing pain shot from my eye socket to the back of my head, straight into my brain. I screamed, dropping the tweezers. But in the mirror, that thing had been pulled out about 2 milliammeters. It wasn't a blood clot. It was a red thread end. I stood frozen, staring at my reflection. A bright, wet red thread, sticking out from the soft flesh of my eye corner. Memories flooded back like a torrent. That day, in the morgue, when he pinned me down, when I passed out after the explosion. He didn't have Teame to take my arm. He didn't have Teame to kill me, but he had Teame to do something else. Rebirth Project. Objective. Unify host and architecture. He didn't need to rebuild his body from fragments. He needed a cocoon, a living, healthy host, to germinate. And I carried his seed out of St. Jude. I nourished it with my fear for the past 3 months. The itching was spreading all over my body. I looked down at my arm. Beneath the thin skin on my wrist, I saw blue veins. No, not blue veins. The veins were turning red. and they were moving. They were twisting, knotting, forming stitches beneath the epidermis. My body was stitching itself back together from the inside. No, no. I backed away, hitting the sink. In the mirror, my face began to change. My facial muscles twitched. A distorted, involuntary smile slowly stretched my mouth to both sides. That wasn't my smile. That was Dr. V's smile. From my throat, a sound emerged. Not a scream, but a snick. Snick. The sound of two vocal cords rubbing against each other like two scissor blades. I grabbed the razor on the counter. I have to cut it out. I have to pull it out. I brought the blade to my left eye. My hand was no longer shaking. It became strangely steady. "Do not resist, Elias," the voice echoed in my head, loud, clear, and full of authority. "We have much work to do. The world out there has too many tears that need mending." I looked in the mirror one last time. My left eye, where the red thread stuck out, suddenly blinked. But my right eye did not. I burst out laughing. The laughter echoed in the cramped bathroom, sounding like metal clanging together. I lowered the razor. Instead, I opened the medicine cabinet, taking out a set of surgical needles and thread that I had unconsciously bought a week ago. I threaded the needle. "That's right," I said, looking at the alien reflection in the mirror. "Where should we start?" "Ah, the mouth. The mouth talks too much." I brought the needle to my lip. Thwack! The needle pierced through my lower lip with a clean slice. I felt no pain. I felt satisfied. This world is too messy. It needs to be organized. It needs to be sewn back together. And we, will be the greatest tailor. The bathroom light flickered and turned a murky red. The nightmare did not end. It was only beginning to spread. Elias thought he had escaped. But the nightmare never lets go of its prey. If you want to know my subsequent stories, the stories that will make you afraid to turn off the lights when you sleep, hit subscribe and turn on notifications immediately. Don't make the Nightmare Weaver have to come find you to tell the story.